tax systems in America. I bet you didn't know that. There's one for the informed and one for the uninformed. Hi, I'm Trish Gleason, the director of the Winter Park, Florida Family Office Association. And today we have with us two experts that's going to help you become more informed. We have Mr. Greg Smith. He's the executive director of the Winter Park Family Office Association. And we have Mr. Andres Kandus from California, and he is a tax elimination and mitigation specialist. Welcome, Greg and Andre. We're happy to have you.
Thanks for having us, Trish.
We're happy to be here.
Well, we're going to learn a lot of strategies. We call it the maximizer method, that we can help people that are have 401ks. We're going to concentrate on the 401k area today, an IRA, and you're going to talk to them about how they can potentially mitigate or eliminate. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Greg Smith, and you've got a lot of questions for Andre, and then you'll join in with your expertise as a, I guess for almost 20 years, you've been a CFP and a tax planning specialist. So we'll be happy to hear from you as well.
Thanks, Trish. Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here, and I think we're going to be able to share some really exciting and, more importantly, helpful information, because in my almost 20 years of being a financial advisor, I never had anybody say, other than one person, so we'll take the outlier out, but I've only had one person that say they should pay more taxes. So he kind of messed up that conversation for me, but almost everybody I've ever met, they said they want to get the IRS out of their pocket. And I think that's more the norm, right?
Yes.
We want more money to go to our beneficiaries and our families and ourselves in retirement than the IRS. So, but Andre, it's a pleasure to be here with you, because you've been double my time, right? I'm almost 20 years. You are in the industry for 40 years, right? As a tax mitigation expert.
I am. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's kind of like, I'd rather have 20 more years to go before I catch you, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Hey, you're a wealth of knowledge, and we're excited to be here with you and Trish, and happy to kind of share some of these strategies for folks that we think will be beneficial for them. And I actually heard that you have, I thought one would be good enough, but you actually have 8 tax attorneys at your disposal, which that's pretty impressive.
You know what? It's even with tax attorneys, there's specialties, and it's just for the wealth of different, when you do this for 40 years, you kind of put together a lot of these strategies, and it's almost like you need different tax attorneys for different things.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, I'm going to go on the sidelines, but I'll be here to help answer any questions or as I think of some. But before we get started, Greg, I did want to let the audience know, what is the Winter Park Family Office Association that you're the executive director and I'm the director? Why are we helping people like this? What is the purpose?
Yeah, thanks, Trish. Thanks for bringing that up. As the executive director of the Winter Park Family Office, we're really here to connect high net worth individuals and share some strategies, connect them, help them collaborate, and also share tools that are going to be beneficial for their success in keeping the IRS out of their pocket. And not just that, but other tools as well. Mm-hmm. But primarily, that's kind of our key focus right now, because one of the top 3 things that investors are asking for is tax planning. And it's really the one thing that most people are not getting. And I don't know what your experience has been, Andre, but that's kind of what we see. And a lot of folks will say, well, I got I have the CPA that's helping me out. But what we find is a lot of CPAs, oftentimes are more like history teachers, and they're telling you about what happened in the past, and we can't change the past. And that's not to say there's some really great CPAs that we've discovered and we've partnered with that do a fantastic job of helping with the tax planning angle. But that's where I Trish and Andre, we want to come from that perspective to get ahead of it, not to get behind it. And, tax planning is very important. And the sooner you start, the better off you're going to be. And that's why we're sharing some of these strategies. But that's really a big part of what we're trying to accomplish with the Winter Park Family Office Association, is to help those high net worth folks, tax mitigate, share strategies, connect, and collaborate.
Great.
It's kind of, to answer your question, it's kind of like saying, you have your general doctor and then you have the heart surgeon. You just can't have both doing both things, right? People specialize in, a CPA is kind of a generalist. They try, but they're so busy with the compliance work. The question is, I usually ask people, when was the last time your CPA offered a new tax strategy? And usually what you get is never, right? Because it's not that they're bad. It's just they don't have the time. That's not their focus. Their focus is to be compliant, have the basic stuff as strategies, and that's it. And that's the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
And Andre, will you or I fill out 1040 forms ever?
I don't think so. But see, that's not our specialty, and so that's why therefore there. But we are busy with other stuff, right?
You got it.
So, Greg, why don't you maybe start asking some questions of Andre, and then put your 2 cents worth in as a tax planning specialist as well.
Yeah, it's a strong focus for us, as it is with Andre, and that's why we partnered with Andre. So, Andre, we'll kind of dive right into it and just look at maybe one of these strategies. There's a lot of strategies, so we can't. I don't think any of the listeners are going to tune in for an 8-hour presentation. So we'll just focus on one of them today. Yes. And maybe you can walk us through how one of these strategies works, and we'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do a high level kind of, we'll give you a high level of the big idea, right? For each strategy. I'm sure if people are going to be interested, we can definitely continue with other strategies. But today I'd really like to focus on what we call a maximizer method, the 401k edition, which is basically the big idea is, people that have a good amount of money in their tax deferred accounts, it can be, regular IRA, could be a 401k, could be a simple IRA, could be anything that's tax deferred. They realize usually too late, if you've got $2 million in your tax deferred account, you realize when it's almost too late that you're going to have a large RMD, which is the required minimum distribution, which kicks in at 73 years old, that you're going to have, because you have these distributions, that's going to trigger what is called provisional income, which is taxation on your Social Security income, which otherwise would not be taxed, right? So you're losing money on taxes on Social Security that you otherwise wouldn't have. And then you have what is called the IRMA effect, which is the increase in cost of your Medicare. It could be $5,000, $10,000 a year more to pay for Medicare because you're considered a wealthy person. So anyway, so people kind of get that idea sooner or later that they're going to have a big problem with that. But now they think, well, man, the only way I can do this is to convert everything to a Roth, right? And a Roth IRA is, as a backdoor Roth conversion, means that you can actually take your, IRA money and convert it into a Roth kind of on a backdoor, not with new contributions, but with the existing money in a tax deferred account. But what that does is you would pay a huge tax on that conversion, which could be in an expensive state like California, where I live, 50%, right? So you're losing 50% of your tax deferred dollars for that conversion, which is outrageous. And so our big idea was, and that, we kind of developed this strategy about 15, 20 years ago, in its initial version, but we keep improving it. We said, okay, we have to find a way, if there is a way, to kind of create, kind of do that, so to speak, a similar effect as a Roth conversion with no negative side effects of our Roth or of our Roth account. So we want to have something that is not just a bucket of money that behaves like a Roth, but we wanted something that is stronger than a Roth, but it has the same tax benefits, meaning no tax on growth, no tax on distribution. But we also wanted to do that conversion with minimal or no out-of-pocket taxes, which sounds like a pie in the sky. You know, it's really, when you hear about it the first time, it sounds unbelievable, but it is possible. And the way to do it is we need to have an asset that we purchase within a qualified plan or an IRA. So an asset that has a very compliance-driven way to measure the appraise the asset, right, after a certain amount of time, and we can do this in between 3 and 5 years of time. And that asset has to have a way to be appraised because of the way it behaves, in a manner where we do the valuation because of the expenses and however the asset is handled within a 401k is then distributed at a lower taxable basis than the amount that has been put in. And I can, probably go into the example of a real estate transaction if you'd like me to do that.
I think that would be a good idea, Andre.
Okay. So, because this is a very difficult, is very abstract to a lot of people, but more people understand, or they think they understand, real estate better. And I'll give you an example of how this compression actually happens. So in the real estate world, there's a concept that's called the J curve. The J curve meaning that, I'm just going to try to simplify it as much as possible. It's not that complicated as it sounds. It's just, if you buy a piece of land, let's say if you buy a land for $300,000 and you're wanting to build a house, you're a developer, you want to build a house on that land and then sell it for $1 million after it's all said and done, right? That's, typically it will cost you maybe another $300,000-$400,000 for all the permits and the foundation and the architects and all that's involved, and maybe costing you another $300,000 on top of the land cost. And then if you finish the whole thing, you would have sold it for $1 million. Mm-hmm. But while you're in the process of doing that, and if you were forced to sell that piece of land before you finish it, then you probably, you just needed money. For example, you just are not able to finish it. Then it's going to be really hard for you to find somebody that's going to pay $600,000, which includes the cost of the land plus all that you've invested in the permits and the design, because that whoever's going to buy that piece of land is going to want to do something completely different, right? So what that means, they're going to say, well, I'll only pay you $300,000, whatever the land is, or I don't care if you spend another $300,000, you just haven't finished the project. So the reality of that is, if I finish the project, I'm going to be able to sell it for $1 million. But if I don't finish the project, I may lose money on this deal because I've invested $600, but I can only collect $300. Mm-hmm. So the point being is, the project has to be finished, meaning that in the middle of the project, the value of this asset is lower than what we have actually spent on it because it's not finished, right? And we're applying the same concept within a 401k. In this case, we're not buying a piece of land and real estate. We're buying a special financial product, a specially designed, custom designed life insurance contract within the 401k plan. And we're applying the same principle as this J curve. So that's kind of the big idea and how it happens and why it happens.
What do you think about that, Greg? Do you have any more addition to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, Andre, it's a great analogy that you use there, and using the J curve for real estate. So what it's doing is taking that snapshot in time at a opportune point in time, right? Saying,
Yes.
hey, we got as your example states, the raw land. We got the raw land. Maybe we're going to build out infrastructure, but the infrastructure hasn't been built out yet. So now let's value this today before that value starts to spike. And for tax purposes, that's a very favorable time to make some of these exchanges that we're talking about. So so I love the analogy, and I know there's a lot of moving parts, going along with this. And one of the objections that we've had from some people is well, that's a lot going on. Who's responsible for executing this correctly, or making sure that it gets executed correctly? Because what a lot of clients and high net worth folks that we've worked with is, they don't want to take on all that administrative responsibility of some of these, what we call sophisticated strategies. So maybe elaborate on that. Who's responsible for it? Making sure it all gets executed correctly to make it a seamless transition.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and obviously, you can imagine that we do not recommend people don't do this at home, right? It's you do need professional guidance and a well-oiled machine crew. We need a good crew to execute this. So we never would just here's your guide, here's your manual, and just do it on your own. It's just impossible. But what we do is, as a team, we work, and the client basically just has to participate and be part of they are always in control of their money. We never are in touch with their assets. So they are the boss, they are the trustee of these plans, they are making decisions, but we're their quarterbacks, and we execute everything for them and guide them by the hand, actually over the years, because to implement this takes typically from 3 to 6 months to start with, but then it's the management of this contract that is first part of the 401k, and then it exits the 401k at that reduced taxable basis, which saves 80% or more on taxes. So at the end of the day, it's outside, but then it's still an asset that needs to be managed, and that's it's all managed by a professional team, obviously.
So with these strategies, I mean, the end game, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andre, the end game is really to pay at little to no taxes on making this exchange, making this change, this transfer. So of pre-tax money to after-tax, potentially tax-free growth. So that sounds like that's kind of our end game, right? Is we want to pay little to no taxes while doing this, which almost sounds too good to be true, right?
Yeah, it does.
The old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But in this case, it's not. It's just too good to be easy to do on your own, maybe. I don't know. What do you think, Andre? How would you state that?
It's too difficult to do on your own, but it's too good to pass, I would say, because
I like that.
We tell everybody, at least take your time to understand the logic, because people spend 50 years or 60 years investing money in the market in the regular way, and they spend sleepless nights and sleepless months and worrying about the market. So you can't expect to understand something that's completely different and much more powerful in half an hour, right? You've spent years understanding and trying to understand what you're doing, and now you're kind of like, oh, well, I don't understand it, it's complicated. Well, it's not that complicated, but you can't expect it to understand it in 5 minutes, right? So the thing is, the end game is so powerful. It's, just the first step alone. Imagine you could do a Roth, even though this is not an exact Roth conversion, it's better than that, but you get the money out of the plan, the 401k plan that's pre-tax, into after-tax monies. If somebody, I'll give you an example. If somebody has $3 million, which is our typical, client, I would say, 3 million or more. But if they were to try to convert into a Roth with that 3 million, they would have lost $1.5 million to taxes, right? They would be left with $1.5 million. Whereas in this case, believe it or not, there is a tiny tax that needs to be paid after the fact, but it's zero out of pocket if the client wants to do that. So they don't have to reach into their pocket from some other sources to pay the tax even. We can actually borrow from the asset, which is the life insurance contract, to pay that tax. But the tax that remains is maybe 10% of whatever they would pay otherwise, just because of this J-curve method of 2 stages of reduction of the taxable basis. And I think it may be a little bit too involved to kind of go into the details of all those different steps today, but I just want to give the listeners the big idea and understanding that in this initial stage, we're converting something that would otherwise be taxable, at least half of it, to a Roth IRA with zero out of pocket. So we preserve the power of that $3 million instead of losing half of it.
So how does the IRS view this strategy? Because it's a very powerful way to keep them out of your pocket, right? So are there any potential pitfalls that you think people should be aware of when trying to execute this? This is one of the common questions that we get, and I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, you can imagine with 8 tax attorneys, behind my back and breathing in my face, it's like we can't do anything that's at least even a little smells of something that could be a potential question, right? So what is very important for us as a combination of financial strategists and tax attorneys is, unlike some outfits that put something together and they don't really understand what we call the appraisal risk. If you're appraising something subjectively, for example, if you're trying to appraise your car or your boat, and you say, well, this is how much it's worth, it's a very subjective appraisal, right? Whereas in this case, what is very important is that the appraisal, the market value of a life insurance contract is very defined. It's defined by the government, by the methodology of appraising the contract is bulletproof. It's not something that the insurance companies made up. It's something that the IRS made up. So they provide the methodology, and you cannot go left and right and make it up. It is what it is, right? So that is the very important part in saying, is this, how does the IRS look at this? The IRS looks at it exactly how they defined it, right? So they don't, if the insurance company values these contracts the way they have to, and they will, because they're not playing any games, the IRS has nothing, they know that it's done exactly the way that it should, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to share something that I think would illustrate why these tax savings are so powerful, which we already understand, the tax savings, implications there and how important tax planning is. But Trish, I had a couple slides I sent over. If maybe you could
let me
share
pull it
those.
up here. That's perfect
I'll just
idea.
point out a couple real quick things, if that's all right.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, and chart ends in 2023, but we get the idea, and we're still on that same tax plan right now, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is actually set to expire at the end of this year. We'll see. They may extend it, or if nothing happens, something happens, and then the current tax policies expire, and the rates will go up a little bit. But in 1913, you had the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and all the famous people, rich people meet, and they wanted to create this, talked about creating this income tax system, federal income tax system. Very un-American at the time, right, Andre?
Yeah, exactly.
But it started out just a little bit, and then bam, it spikes way up. So you can see there, why did it spike up? Well, you had World War I. You had guys fighting in the trenches, and it was the most expensive war the world has ever seen. Well, the Allies win the war, so you can see on that chart. And Trish, I don't know if there's a way to use like something to draw on there, but you can see the big drop after the war was won. We had to finance the war. We had to pay for it. That's why tax rates spiked so high. And then the Allies win, it goes down. And then guess what? Germany and Japan, they're at it again. So now we have World War II, which is now by far the most expensive war the world's ever seen. And now it's whoever wins this war is going to have the best tanks and planes and submarines and technology. So this war costs a lot more. It's not just people fighting in the trenches anymore. So we had pretty high tax rates for a while, and as recent as 1978, we had 70% tax rates, top marginal tax rates, as you can see on this chart. So that's fairly recent. And then now we're in lower territory, but that certainly can change. And if we look at the next slide, let me see here if I can, there we go. This one's a pretty busy slide, so it might be hard for some people to see, but the main thing I wanted to highlight on there is, wow, it's very hard to see. But the debt on here, let's see if I can find that. There, okay, it's at the top left. I was having a hard time finding it, and I've been using this slide, so you can imagine. All right, so the U.S. national debt, and this is usdebtclock.org, O-R-G. It's kind of interesting. If you go to the website, you'll see all these numbers in real time, constantly changing. But I took a snapshot a few days ago. And the U.S. national debt is almost $37 trillion. That's trillion with a T. And when you look at that number, I don't know what your thought is on that, Andre, but a lot of people think that tax rates are probably going to go up some point in the future. So it's important to plan now before that happens. Mm-hmm. And if you ask any 7-year-old kid, they might tell you that tax rates or the debt could be going to infinity and beyond.
Yeah.
So to make a little Toy Story reference there, but
thinking about the looking at that chart that you showed us, if you think about it, we are now at a lowest we're pretty much at the lowest tax rate that this country has ever been. So, if taxes go somewhere, they're going to go up. I mean, we listen to, politicians every day and how they're trying to do this and they're trying to do that, but the numbers are black and white. They can do certain things, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on taxes, and I would not count on taxes going down. I would count on taxes going up. So it's better to get out of the tax, this tax situation as soon as possible if there's a legal way to do it, and there is a legal way to do it. So now is the time. And I have an interesting. I don't know if you kind of know about this, but this is an interesting story. When taxes were after the Second World War, they were still pretty high. And Ronald Reagan, he's an actor, right? He was in the movies in Hollywood. And in California, in your highest bracket, your highest federal bracket would be 93%, wow, which was above a certain number. I don't know if it was 100,000 at that time or 1 million. And then California took the remaining 7. Right. So basically, Ronald Reagan, apparently, he made so much money with one movie that for him to do 2 movies a year didn't make any sense, because when he made one movie, he would still keep some money. But for the second movie, everything would go to taxes. So he says, doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? He was in a 93% tax bracket with the second movie. So 93% went to the feds and 7% went to California. So he's like, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if Ronald Reagan wasn't in California, he might have been the next John Wayne, huh?
Exactly.
But, I was thinking back to your chart, Greg, can you imagine the people that are watching this program that have $1, $2, $3, $4 or more $1 million in their 401k or their IRA, and they don't know where taxes are going to go? Can you imagine if this was 1978, they only owned 30% of their money? And Andre, in association with Greg and myself, we're trying to show you ways that you can be informed and make a big difference to where, who knows, let Andre work his magic with his projections, but you could save or mitigate up to 100% in taxes with these strategies.
And then not only are you mitigating the taxes, you're now in a position that anything that you earn after that is all tax-free, because it has the status of a Roth IRA. It's not exactly a Roth IRA. It's better. It's a life insurance contract of a very specially, custom designed one, but it has the tax advantages of a Roth IRA. So first we distribute the money at a 0% out of pocket tax liability, because we can reduce the taxes first quite a bit because of this actual situation with the value of the contract. And then we can borrow. We don't even have to reach in our pocket for the remaining taxes. We can borrow from the life insurance contract, and it is still such a small number compared to the big asset value of the total policy value. And that keeps growing going into the future with downside protection, meaning that there's no loss guarantee. It's kind of like going to Las Vegas and finding this magic blackjack table that every time you lose, you get your money back, right? You just have to keep playing. You just have enough money to pay for the hotel, but you're going to win big if you just keep trying. That's exactly what happens in a well-designed policy compared to your 401k, where if the market goes down, people typically lose money. It's just much harder to compete.
Speaking of life insurance policies, I'll guarantee you some of the viewers today are thinking, well, this leveraging sounds pretty interesting, except I'm not insurable. Can you talk about that?
That is an excellent question. Well, the beauty of this strategy is actually that we can, when we purchase life insurance within a qualified plan, which is with pre-tax dollars, the way that we do it is we purchase it within a company sponsored plan. So our clients, either they are business owners or we help them become a business owner. There's no regulation of a certain amount of money that you have to make. But as a sponsor, any U.S. person can, start a business, an LLC, and every LLC can what is called sponsor a 401k plan. So that 401k plan, let's say you're a father and a mother of a family that, you're in your maybe mid 60s and you have kids that are in their 30s, right? So you can, instead of just having this 401k for you, the parents, you can make this company a family business, and the kids are also part of that business. So they can be participants in the plan, which means that we can purchase life insurance on the kids instead of the parents. But the parents control the policies. They're the owner of the policies as long as they're alive. So they harvest the policies for income. It's kind of like it's kind of like planting an orchard. Think about, I'm just giving these little, maybe silly examples to demonstrate how this works. But it's kind of like if the parents planted an orchard and, they harvested the apples as long as they live, right? But instead of then selling the orchard, the kids inherit the orchard. And the orchard is now that much bigger because the trees kept growing. There's more and more apples. So they collect the apples for the next generation, and they can pass on the same orchard to the third generation. So that's how the parents, we can purchase, going back to the maybe the issue of uninsurability, we can purchase the policies on the kids or any family member that's part of the business. That we just can't do it on a 2-year-old, right? Because they have to be employment age, and they have to make some money on their own accord, meaning that they have to have a job or something, because there's what is called an insurability interest requirement. There has to be a reason why we need to purchase life insurance on any person. But that's how we solve this. I've never had a situation, even if there was somebody who's, maybe their health condition was not the best, so they couldn't qualify, or their rating would be too bad. Most of the time there's other members of the family that we can plug in, and we kind of look at those situations and work hard in optimizing the structure.
So Trish, if someone listening to this, they want to move forward, obviously there's a lot of moving parts, and you definitely want to look at their specific situation and run some numbers. But if they want to move forward or take the next step, what's the next part of the process here?
Well, and Andre will talk about this a little bit, but this is it's not a quick answer. There's a lot of moving parts. Andre would prepare reports. Greg would look at everything tax planning wise. Everybody would be meeting, and that we would have those attorneys look at the structure to make sure it was correct. So the first step would just be very preliminary, a 15-minute complimentary appointment. You would go to our Calendly, or you can email us as per written here below, and just talk with me for 15 minutes, just so I can qualify you. And then at that point, if we feel that if I feel that it's worth it for you, then we'll move to phase 2 and get Greg and Andre in the conversation and schedule a Zoom call. We do not replace your CPA. Just keep that in mind. That's important to know. So I'd like to turn it now over to Andre, if you'd like to elaborate on the steps a little more.
Yes, definitely. So yes, we want to see if we're a good fit for each other, right? So that's the obviously Trish is the boss for that. She's wonderful, and she will determine whether we're a good fit. And if you guys both agree, we go to the next step, where we kind of meet what we call it the first meeting, where we talk about the big idea again, that we kind of present the strategy in a little bit more detail than we're talking today, but enough to kind of for the prospect to understand it better. And then if they're interested, and I would say 99% are very interested to keep going in this educational process, we kind of try to figure out and gather information about their financial situation, about approximate amounts and family members and all these things that are important to put this puzzle together. And then we would, after this first meeting, we would then move to the second meeting, where we would prepare what we call hypothetical synthetic asset models. We would kind of try to model and compare whatever this strategy can do for the client compared to their typical, their approach so far, which is typically a 401k and investing in the market and then just distributing it, right? And so that becomes it's usually a shocking revelation, because we can generate so much more value in this generational wealth transfer that it is shocking. So that second meeting, when we look at the first draft of the numbers, it's almost like, wow, it is a huge difference between the 401k and this approach, just because of all these facts that I've mentioned before. And so what happens then is we kind of, the prospect looks at that and obviously is really interested in exploring it further. So then we go to the next phase, which is more detailed planning. And we go on one-on-one calls where there's not so many people involved, where we can kind of talk about the specifics of the family situation, the family dynamics. You never know. Some people have finances together. Some people don't. Some people, most people love their kids, but sometimes they don't trust their kids in how good they are with finances. And so there's many different ways to skin this cat. We would then sometimes form a family trust to kind of manage the whole dynamics. There's just many different ways to do it. And we like to really thoroughly work on the design so that at the end of the day, we go in a direction that the client really feels that that's what they want.
Mm-hmm. In listening to you, and I know because we've worked together before, a Roth IRA is maybe one step. You fund the Roth and then you take it out tax-free. So that's 2 steps. The steps you're talking about are somewhere between 6 and 10 steps, very complicated, and they are different for most every person, correct?
Well, see, when we talk about Roth, we only mention Roth because people think they understand what Roth is. Roth is just a container of money where you've paid taxes to get into a Roth, and then you don't pay taxes in the future for any gains or distributions, right? But it still doesn't protect you from losing money, right? Mm-hmm. Roth is just it's a better situation in terms of taxability, mm-hmm. but it's still just a very, it's a very plain thing that somebody has to manage, and it can also lose value. Whereas mm-hmm. what we're talking about here is we're transforming the pre-tax dollars into a much more powerful, specially designed life insurance contract or contracts if it's several people, as I was explaining before, mm-hmm. so that then the policies themselves are going to be generating tax-free income for the rest of their lives. And there's a lot of ways that we can tweak. And, for example, in the case of Greg managing the money as in addition to the policy itself, now the client can make money on both sides for the same amount of money, for the same cash flow. They can make money in the policy, and they can make money on the money that's managed outside of the policy. And then combining the two combined is going to provide the sum of both gains. That on one side the policy does its thing, on the other side Greg does its thing, which is much more stable than if Greg just had to do his own thing. He wouldn't have a backup of the policy. So it's a little bit of I don't even want to get into too much detail today because it's a little bit of an abstract concept that I think is better explained when people get to that second meeting and we go deep into the spreadsheet and explain it. But suffice to say, it's kind of like having a rich uncle that's always has your back instead of being alone, right? And if you lose money in the market, there's nobody to save you. Whereas here, you've got your policy that's your rich uncle, and then you can be more aggressive in the market if you really want to be, but you actually don't have to be, because now you're compared to somebody that has to pay a 30% tax on every gain, mm-hmm. you even with 30% less average return, you're keeping the same, right? So mm-hmm. the pressure on performance is much lower. The pressure of everybody to perform, and we know that the more aggressive you are in the market, the more volatile your account can be. So if you can keep your investment approach to a more conservative level, then it's just not going to be as volatile. But if you can keep this, if your final effect is the same as if you are more aggressive, but then you would lose money to taxes, what's the point of doing it that way, right?
Right. Greg, do you think where I was trying to get at with these steps is, do you think because there's so many steps, this is a advanced strategies, do you think that's why so many CPAs are not initiating this with their clients? Can you address that, please?
Yeah, great question, Trish. And I think that's really the reality of it is it's a lot of behind the scenes work. There's a lot of moving parts. Although Andre, helps make that seamless for the client, the CPAs, they still want to, understand all the steps, and a lot of them haven't taken the time to really tax plan, like we've said. And we think that's real important. And going back to my analogy of, a lot of the CPAs are like the history teachers, right? They're telling you what happened in the past, and you can't really change the past. So this is a strategy that you have to plan, not, you don't hand it to the CPA at March or April, by April 15th, and then they do their magic. You have to work on this in advance, and there's many steps. It is a bit of a complicated process, but once you understand it, it's not so complicated. It just takes some time to get educated on the strategy. And I think that's one of the key reasons why many of the CPAs don't know about or promote the strategies, just the same as they don't promote a lot of other tax planning strategies that I myself have used in the past almost 20 years as a financial advisor and now certified financial planner, because it's work, right? It's extra work, and
it's a full-time job, right? I mean, it's a full-time job. You can't you just can't, right?
Mm-hmm. For example, can we pull up just real quickly to show the audience how many tax codes Andre's team of tax attorneys have listed that they're following? Do you mind, Greg? Can I pull that up? I think I have it. Can I pull it up?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Oops, hang on. There we go. I'm not quite as fast as you guys, apparently. So if you'll look at the very bottom, audience, you'll see all these listings of every tax code they're following.
I think
And we'll
maybe
turn
if
the
you make
page.
it bigger.
Yeah, is there a way to make it cover the whole screen?
Sure. Hang on. Okay, there we go. Getting a little more brilliant here. Okay, so if you'll see me,
even this is probably small, but you see all those footnotes, that those are all tax codes.
look at that. Here, let me go back a couple pages for the audience. Yep. Anyway, I just thought that would be good to show. And then Andre, I think you had another document you wanted to show.
Yeah. This is
the audience would like to see that.
This is the shocking part, and I really want to kind of spark people's attention about this, that it's worth their time, even though after maybe today's conversation that we have, people say, well, this is so complicated. Actually, it's not. It's not for the client. It's a lot of work for us to put it together, but for the client, it's not. But it's definitely worth their time to spend the time trying to understand it and take advantage of it, because it just creates generational wealth that you cannot even imagine, right? So if you want to share,
Yes. And then while I'm getting ready to share that, Greg, can you mention, or Andre, if for all the audience, what would be the minimum amount of money when they call me that I'm going to accept? Can you talk about that just briefly?
Well, we're looking at our typical client is probably in a neighborhood of 2 million plus in their 401k plan, but we can definitely work with people with $1 million or more. If they're smart, they can they can never have problems with money, right? I mean, I shouldn't say problems. You gotta, it's almost like you're creating trust babies with this, but if you do it wisely, then that wouldn't happen. Just like we have, historically speaking, there's certain families like I know that the Rockefellers are still doing quite well, whereas what's the other family that's kind of there's one family that's not doing so famously well.
Rothschilds, the
No,
Rothschilds.
Rothschilds are doing well, I
Uh-huh.
think. The Rockefellers are doing well, but there's a third one that's very famous as well. But I'm just
Not the Vanderbilts or
the Vanderbilts.
Oh,
Yes, the
yeah.
Vanderbilts.
Good going, Greg.
They are basically in far away from these other guys, right? Just because they just have not managed it the same way. I mean, those are kind of famous examples, but it doesn't mean that we're talking about somebody that's done well. I know obviously this doctor has 7.5. That's a lot of money, right? But he could either just spend it and that's it, or he can really create multi-generational wealth. And it was interesting when we talked for the first time. His wife, they're very humble people, even if they have a lot of money. But they still said, well, we really don't want our kids to be trust babies, and maybe they shouldn't have that much money, right? But then they started thinking, well, they can support this charity, they can support that charity. It's better to have a good problem like that than not. So what we feel is money in the private hands in general is much better managed than any government can manage the money. So why not do it wisely and have that opportunity?
Greg, one of the advantages of this program, as Andre mentioned, was elimination of RMD. How much does elimination of a required minimum distribution help your high net worth clients and our members and associates at the Winter Park Family Office Association? How can that be impactful?
Yeah, great question, Trish. So the required minimum distributions, when you have those in these pre-tax IRA or 401k accounts, they certainly add to the taxable income basis or the adjusted gross income. And oftentimes these same people that we're talking about right now with Andre, the ones that might have, 2 million or 5 million or 7.5, in a pre-tax account, well, they're going to have a pretty big required minimum distribution. And why does the government make us take money out of pre-tax accounts? Well, Andre and Trish, you probably both know that answer. They get tax revenue, they get tax dollars to fund their projects, and they may not be the projects that you're interested in funding. So that's where some of these strategies come into place. But if you can avoid required minimum distributions, that certainly can do a few things. It can bring down your marginal tax bracket, number one. It can also, as Andre has mentioned, potentially decrease Social Security taxes. It can also decrease Medicare Part B surcharges, some excess premiums. The IRMA tax as well, which is another stealth tax. There's a lot of stealth taxes that go above and beyond what the marginal bracket tax is, because we're in a progressive tax system, and the last dollar you make, you're keeping less of that than the first dollar you made. So if you can shift some of this income and not have to take required minimum distributions, or at least get them down to a minimum, then you can potentially save on your marginal tax bracket. You can save in your Medicare Part B premiums. You can potentially save in Medicare Part D premiums. You can potentially save on Social Security taxes. And then there's a plethora of some other things that are applicable to certain people. For sake of time, we won't go into all of them, but there's a lot, right? So if you can avoid the required minimum distribution tax or extra taxable income, that can have some positive benefits today.
So if somebody's,
these small, these seemingly small amounts, they really add up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Andre, or Greg, either one of you, let's say I'm a person with a $3 million still in my 401k or IRA, and I'm 73. Roughly, what are they going to be forced to take out every year of that account? Is it like 3%? I believe Greg actually knows the number.
Yeah, I'd say it's based on actuarial tables and it's closer to 4%, but just under. So what was the amount you said?
Oh, 3 million. They're going to be forced to take out $120,000 a year.
Okay, yeah. So that's a big increase to the taxable income, and as they age over time, well, that divisor, let's just call it, for simplicity's sake, we'll call it 4%.
Mm-hmm.
And that divisor gets bigger and bigger. So because as we age, our life expectancy drops.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take out a larger percentage of those accounts year
Mm-hmm.
after year after year. So although maybe you can grow the account beyond that, you're going to take out a larger and larger percentage, meaning that more and more income could potentially be taxable over time, just depending on how the account performs and
Right.
what age you're at the time. If you're 90 years old and you have an IRA still, and you're fortunate to still have an IRA, a pre-tax IRA, you're going to have to take out a large chunk of that, each year, where that account's most likely going to be depleted within a few years. And that's added all as taxable income.
Yeah. So it grows exponentially larger, or should we say worse?
I'd say
they're forced.
The required distribution factor increases every year, like the amount that you have to take out of the pre-tax account, the percentage of that account. Now, the account value might be less because you've been taking money out, but the percentage of that account is going to increase year after year after year.
So if you take that, and then we know they're going to probably have Social Security, let's just ballpark it and say 80 grand between two people. So now they're up to 200,000 income, not counting any other income. They're going to be forced into a large tax bracket.
They just made the IRS their beneficiary in retirement.
Exactly. And it's even worse if people say, "Oh, I'm just going to leave it to my kids." Well, that's even worse, because they have to an inherited IRA has to be distributed in 10 years, right?
10 years,
yeah.
So you can't escape it. I mean, there's really the government can calculate very well how much they can calculate their cash flow pretty well. It's almost like an annuity for the government, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically.
And what did I saw somewhere where the advantages are litigation proof, sheltered from creditors, a litigation proof?
Well, that's another thing that is kind of baked into the life insurance contracts. That is in most states, it differs a little bit, but in most states, it has a very strong asset protection component to it. So it's definitely much safer than any other assets anywhere else besides the true 401k. And it really, people like that, because you never know. You don't want your money to be taken away from you in retirement if you have an accident on the freeway, right? And that you get sued, and then you're 80 years old or 90 years old, and you lose your assets. So
right.
it is very useful that there is a very strong asset protection component with these plans. Right. Absolutely.
I just have one more question. I don't know if Greg or Andre want to answer this, but it in some of your material, it says no out-of-pocket taxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you address that a little bit?
So this maybe this is definitely deserves a kind of I would say that second call that I was talking about, but I'm going to try to
just say it's true.
Oh yeah, it's true.
Okay,
it's
so
true.
then we'll get into it next time. How's that?
It is definitely true. It's just how it happens is deserves more time.
Okay. So before we close, I just want everybody to know again that if you'll notice below, it says the maximizer method has 4 strategies. Today, Greg Smith and Andres Kandus, we're talking about the 401k IRA to show you ways to get money out of your 401k IRA with the least amount of taxes, which could be up to 100% less taxes. Other episodes, we are going to be discussing the high end for the people that are high earned income, capital gains mitigation, and estate preservation and maximization. But today, our topic was the 401k IRA. Would you like to make any mentions about any of the other strategies to pique people's interest?
Well, definitely. Here's how we look at it as a group that does this for, that's our, let's say, life calling. We want to really we want to do a full circle, right? So people, if you look at the life of a typical person who is successful in their job or business, they keep making money, they try hard, they really, put their heart and soul in whatever they're doing, and they're being taxed every year. If they're making $1 million, they're being taxed big time, right? So the first thing that we need to kind of worry about is how do we reduce taxes on that earned income, whether it's W-2, whether it's business income. You've got doctors who are making $1 million or $2 million, but they're paying half of it to taxes, right? And so what happens is every dollar counts when you start compounding it. So the first level of strategies, what we call our core strategies, deal with tax savings, tax mitigation on earned income, which is the year by year taxation, right? Mm-hmm. Those same people then have a 401k, the strategy that we kind of on a very high level cover today. These same people might also be selling certain assets. So they may be selling a business. They may be selling real estate property. So they may have a capital gains tax challenge at some point. Those transactions a lot of times are even much bigger because they may be selling, a business that's worth $10 million, right? So there's another strategy very similar to what we've discussed today. It just deals with capital gains taxes. So we've covered earned income, 401k money, capital gains, and then lastly, those same people again, if they keep going, their net worth or the family net worth may be such that they're going to owe estate taxes. So our point being is, well, what's the point of saving all these taxes throughout your life if you're then hit with huge estate taxes? So the point being is we also have to be able to take care of minimizing or eliminating estate taxes. So that's the last kind of that completes the circle. Mm-hmm. With strategies that solve that challenge. So we're kind of that's kind of the maximizer as a concept. Let's take care of taxes from cradle to grave, pretty much. Mm-hmm. That's how we can be the most efficient, because you know what I mean? It just why would you not have to? Right. Why would you work so hard to save taxes while you're alive and then lose half of it to estate taxes, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So every step is important.
So I'm just thinking for the audience, if you're a beneficiary or an heir, you may want to get a hold of your folks or whoever is going to be leaving you the money, and let's get a meeting put together to see if we can't put your assets that you're going to inherit in a much better position for yourself and much larger possibly. So we're happy to do that too. Cost. What does this cost, Greg, to meet with you and Andre?
Zero.
Oh, that's our language.
Andre, the okay sign, zero.
Yeah.
People really like zero, and we kind of feel that, we have to take that time and give everybody that feels that they qualify a benefit of a doubt and spend a little time to kind of figure out whether we're a good fit. And even
Okay.
then, later we it's the money that, the out-of-pocket expenses for the clients are so low compared to what they're saving and what they're making. It's like at least 100 to 1, right? So it's the costs of doing this. We just as a group, we need to, we're not a, HR block. We're not there to have 100,000 clients, right? We are a very specialized group, and we want to service every client really well. So there has to be a certain economy of scale. That's why we have these minimums, because we just, otherwise we just can't provide the service that everybody deserves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but by doing that, then we're able to do that, and that's really important to everybody, our clients and ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're about ready to wrap up. We will be putting this on YouTube and sending it to over 5,000 of our high net worth individuals, Winter Park Family Office affiliate people. Greg, would you like to mention anything about what's going on at the family office in Winter Park? Any new events coming up, or
I'm sorry, I have my dogs barking in the background.
Oh, okay. Well, I happen to know that you've got some, you started these, possibly some great projects coming up for Winter Park Family Office Association.
Yeah,
And I just thought this would be a good time to throw out a little kudos for yourself.
Yeah, we have a lot of exciting stuff coming up, and for the Winter Park Family Office, and some presentations on different strategies, and Andre, we'd like to get you in on some of those, because this is a very helpful strategy that I think a lot of the folks that we connect with can benefit from. But we also have excited to have the event we're doing with Kevin coming up pretty soon. So a lot of information, some travel events, just a lot of exciting stuff. I could have the whole list. We might want to leave that for another Zoom call.
Yeah, I guess just email us for any viewers who would like to get on our list, who is not already. And I think with that said, I want to thank both of you as being our guests and helping to explain this and help people. And until next time, because we will be having another one regarding the high earned income soon. So thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Trish.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. And we love it. Thank you.